Alright, hey guys, this is Aiden C. Brady. I have not made a video like this in a long time. In fact, it's been about 2 years since I last made a video documenting the Mekanism features, but with V9 just around the corner, and a lot of new content in the works, I thought it'd be smart to maybe go over a few of the new things because they do get a bit complicated, and I like to make things stay pretty intuitive, but this is one of those cases where it might actually be smart to explain how some things work. So, this video is going to be talking about the new turbines, and the turbines are probably the most advanced, I guess, content I've had to Mekanism in terms of its creation and maintenance. Its full name is the Industrial Turbine. It's a multi-block structure, and there's a lot of parts to it that you can use for expanding it and changing the way that it works. And I guess I'll just go into depth with them and explain just the way that I developed them and how I intend for them to be used. So let's get started. First step in making one of these turbines is creating the frame, and the frame is made with casing just like all other Mekanism multi-blocks. And one design change that I did add for Mekanism V9 is structural glass. And I think you probably remember dynamic glass from dynamic tanks in the older versions, but structural glass has been added and replaced dynamic glass to basically serve as the universal glass in multi-block structures. So structural glass can be put on any multi-block structure aside from the solar evaporation controllers and the reactor. And there are some new reactors, new multi-blocks in this new version. So it makes it kind of handy to not have a bunch of different glasses for the different kinds of machines you may be using. So for the turbine, and we have those down here, you can notice that we have some new fancy textures here, courtesy of Cyanide X. But if we scroll down here, like I said, the turbine, there's a lot of different blocks that comprise the turbine structure. We have the turbine rotor, the rotational complex, electromagnetic coil, the turbine casing, and then you have the valve and the vent. And I'll go into depth on all these and the way they work. But to start off, we really only need turbine casing, and we have structural glass in my inventory too for when I need it. And I'll go ahead and put these in my inventory too because I know that we are going to need them eventually, as well as, as well as the turbine casing. The turbine blade. And excuse me, I have a bit of a cough right now, sadly, because I'm about to graduate and do not want to be sick when I graduate. But oh well. So let's get started. First thing that you should know about the turbine frame is that all Mekanism multi-blocks have a maximum size of 18 by 18 by 18. So basically, you cannot exceed 18 blocks in one direction for any axis that you're making your multi-block on. So this is a requisite of all multi-blocks, but for turbine casing specifically, the length width must be equal in all cases. So you can't have like a 2 by 3. It has to be 3 by 3. And speaking of which, it also must be an odd number. So you need to have to make sure that your frame's length and width are an odd number and equal. So the minimum you can have for a turbine, turbine's pretty big, is 5. So you must have a base of at least 5. You can add it like 7 or 9 or as big as you want. That's less than 18, so really 17 by 17 by 17 would be the max. Well, 17 by 18 by 17 if you count 18 in the y direction. So when we get started, I'm going to make this a bit high because there are a lot of different parts to this that add together to make the final structure. And because of that, I want to make sure we have room for everything, as well as a bit of extra room just so I can document the way some things work. So I'll work on the structure here, and once this is done, I'm not going to add glass yet because there are still things that we need to put on the inside, and also leave the top uncovered because there's more to add to this than just that. And I forgot one block. It's the pressure disperser, which is in here somewhere. Here we go. Alright, so the next step here is making a turbine, the turbine itself. And the turbine goes inside of the turbine casing, and this is what generates the electricity in the final multi-block structure. And you start this off by placing the first turbine block in the very center, on top of this center block here. And it's a nice little just block-shaped thing. And, oops, that's a bug I need to fix. You can add to this by adding on new blocks, and I would suggest for something about this size, 4 would probably be good. And once you have your turbine rods here set up, you can use turbine blades to actually make the turbine structure and shape. And you can just right-click any of these turbines and it'll add it to the bottom of the structure. So right-clicking this, you can see as the blades are added onto the structure. And you can have a maximum of 2 of these blades per rod unit. And once that's all done, this is basically going to be what generates our energy in this multi-block. And one thing I'd like to note too is that you cannot have a casing that allows the turbine to basically touch the glass. So you're going to need to expand this to say 7 by 7 by 7 once you make this tall enough. Like, you're not going to be able to make a multi-block structure if these I don't know, whatever you call them, these rods are extending out too far, the blades are touching the glass that would be right here. So see, in this case we're fine because it's not touching that. And the next step is going to be to place the rotational complex on top of these rods. So the rotational complex basically is what transmits these the kinetic energy from these spinning blades into the coils that actually generate the electricity. And maybe I forgot to put the coil on my electricity, in my inventory. Yeah, I think I did. The coils are what actually generate the energy, and those go on top. But first, you need to make sure you have some pressure dispersers lined up around the outside. And the pressure dispersers must basically form a horizontal plane that go around the rotational complex. They must go here. And you must make sure that once you place the glass and everything down, that there's no way that, I guess, steam in here can get up into this area. So make sure that this entirely encompasses the region inside of here, the length and width, obviously not including the glass because you're going to have glass or vents here. And I'll explain the use of the vents later. But that's important. And once you have all this set up, you can place down some of these coils. And the coils go on top, and I'll explain the use of these later, but the coils basically are a limiting crafting element in the creation of your electricity generation of these turbines. So once you already have all this placed, we're pretty much done with the electricity generation side of things, but we still need to finish the structure, and to do that, we're going to need to place some vents down, or casing. In fact, I'll show casing first, just to demonstrate the way that this is going to work without any vents. Vents are important because vents allow the steam, after it has gone through these dispersers, to actually exit the turbine. And if there's no vents, then there's no way that the steam can escape, and the pressure will just build up. And I was considering adding explosion mechanics, but I'm thinking about holding off unless we get a lot of popular support for that, because I know that some people are very not big fans of damage to the world. So if we did add something, it would definitely be configurable and most likely off by default. So let's get this pig out of here. Okay, you can stay if you want. So next, we're going to need to add some glass to the outside here for the structure to form. And everything must be right on this structure for everything to work. So like if you don't have any coils on top of here, I'm pretty sure that I've added it in so the structure will not form, because you need these coils for electricity to actually be generated. Otherwise, you're just going to be spinning this guy here and nothing's going to happen. Oh, and by the way, one other little thing to add into this. These coils, the base must be touching this complex right here. So these are not actually going to be connected to the turbine itself, and because of that, they're not going to generate energy. In order for these to generate energy, they must be connected to this complex here on top. So, for example, these are all going to generate energy. This, in this case, would cause a problem because this is not actually connected to the block that's connected to the complex. So this would not form the structural multi-block. Placing this down, you can see everything is going to work fine, and I added in a nice little CDM texture so that you can kind of see the connections. And once we clear all this up and add some glass, we should see the structure form. And once the structure is formed, it's actually not going to function yet, because like I said, we need to add the vents, but I'll explain the use of those once the glass is added. And like I said, the structural glass is universal on all Mekanism multi-blocks except for the ones I noted, so that means that the same glass is what you're going to already have on your dynamic tanks, which are conversion, well, here you can see it's formed, but these will already be in your dynamic tanks, so you can also sub them out if you want to for your turbine if you decide to make one. So the turbine is now formed, and you saw the little sparkles which indicate that the multi-block has been formed. You can just right-click the glass if you want to open up the interface, and it's a nice little interface. This here shows the steam. This is the steam input rate, which basically defines how much steam is entering here, and the bar basically represents how much is being inputted compared to the maximum value, which is how much can be processed, which is dependent on the amount of pressure dispersers you have and the amount of vents. So if we open up the statistics panel here, you'll see that there's two limiting factors in this case. There's always going to be a limiting factor unless the two are equal. So in this case, you can see that the limiting factor in production are the blades. And this is because we have enough coils to support all the blades we have here. So because of that, the amount of blades we have is limiting how many coils we can have. And the maximum amount of blades that you can have is 28, because the max size turbine would allow for a 14 high one of these turbine things, I guess, turbine rods. And by being 14 high and multiplying that by 2 for the amount of blades you can have, that would account for 28 different blades. And again, going in here, you can see that the steam flow is also limited by the amount of vents we have. We have no vents, and we have 8 dispersers. So the way to counter this is just by adding vents to the level of the pressure dispersers or above the pressure dispersers. And you can't let these comprise the frame or the multi-block will not form. So if we had a vent here, this would not form because this is too low. It needs to be at the level of the dispersers or above, because that wouldn't make sense for you to let steam exit before it's actually been processed in the turbine and brought upwards. So we'll put the glass back here, and we can start adding on some vents to the structure. And you can see just by adding these 3, we now have a maximum flow rate of 48,000 millibuckets of steam per tick. And that's a lot, as you can see. And you can see that it also has a factor of 16,000 millibuckets per tick per every vent you place down. Now, it's a lot more for these dispersers, but the dispersers also have other things brought into their calculations, such as the size of the multi-block. The size of the casing, so if you have a much bigger, I guess, just multi-block structure and have a lot more room in here for the steam to be stored in, and the steam storage area does not take into account this layer. So basically, the amount of steam that can be put in here is determined by the this corner to this corner, this prism. So that's how much steam. Do not account the pressure disperser into that. So, but like I said, that's 16,000 per. So we'll need to add some more vents and actually take advantage of all the steam that can be transversed. And obviously, 16,000 per tick, that's a ton. But I mean, Mekanism's reactor can technically output amounts of like 16 million if you're just plugging in a bunch of I don't know, steam. I mean, a bunch of fuel from a direct source instead of using the direct tritium and deuterium connection. With straight deuterium and tritium, I'm pretty sure that the maximum is about 1.6 million, but still, that way exceeds 16,000. So by adding this many in, you can see we now have a much greater steam flow, maximum flow. And if we go in statistics here, we're still actually unlimited. So in this case, the dispersers are actually accounting for enough as to where adding more of these vents would allow for more steam to be processed. So if we try and get rid of this top layer, add on some vents up here, which is totally acceptable, I'm pretty sure that this is going to allow for, yes, now the dispersers are limiting. So the only way now, we're basically maxed out to the amount of steam that can be transferred in this size of machine, or this size of a turbine. So the best way to allow more would be to expand the structure, which would result in more dispersers being placed around the rotational complex. So this is now basically a pretty much maximized turbine, and you can create valves on this guy here anywhere you want. You can put one up here if you wanted, but I'd recommend leaving that for the vents. And these fancy little valves here will allow for both the input of steam and for the output of energy. So by putting in a little bit of steam, you will create basically a proportional amount of energy that will come out. And all those values are configurable, but I've done a lot of balance work. In fact, I spent about 2 days just pondering how to make the balance work, so I can assure you that it'll work out just fine. And for server owners out there, it's very easy to configure this thing and tune it down if you want to be much less than what the default is, or more if you want. So just to demonstrate a little bit, because the animation's pretty cool, one thing I added in Mekanism version 9 are fluid tanks that are tiered. And look at that, we have ultimate fluid tanks and all kinds of cool stuff. So we'll get one of these. Actually, no, we don't want that. We want steam. One of these steam ultimate fluid tanks, along with some mechanical piping. And we'll connect that up to one of these valves, and you'll see that as soon as we place this down along with this and tell this to output, we'll use a configurator and tell it to pull out, you'll see that it'll start to spin a little bit, and you can see the steam build up in there as it did. And you see that we are generating a bit of energy in here. We have 2.9 something megajoules of energy just from that amount of steam, which was actually a lot. It was 112,000 millibuckets, but still, that's a good bit of energy produced from that much steam. And like I said, those numbers can all be tuned down if you want, but this is just enough that makes it a bit competitive with other mods, and tweaking can be done to tune it down if you want, or tune it up. Like I said, everything's configurable because it seems like that's what the people want. So anyway, if we add on a bit more of these things, you can see it kind of speeds up as the steam pressure rises. And this has been a lot of fun to work on, actually, just the structure in general and getting everything working. But hopefully you found this video informative in some way, and if you have any requests on how certain things work or explanations of certain things, I'd be happy to document them either on my website or on my wiki. or just by making another video, if that's a better way of communicating the way things work. So yeah, just let me know. You can leave something in the comments, or you can message me on Reddit or wherever, and I'll be happy to get back to you. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.